Brock Lesnar versus Oba Femi. Oh no,
They said it couldn't happen. They said WWE would never let two legitimate monsters destroy each other in a single match. They were catastrophically, violently, unforgettably wrong. Monday Night Raw just delivered a match that redefined what physical dominance looks like in professional wrestling, and the shockwaves are still rippling through an industry that thought it had seen everything. Brock Lesnar versus Oba Femi wasn't just a contest between two physically imposing specimens. It was a collision of philosophies, a clash of eras, a brutal examination of what happens when the established beast meets the rising ruler in a confrontation that neither man was willing to lose. And what transpired in that ring, what we witnessed as these two forces of nature threw caution and safety protocols completely out the window, has created a seismic shift in WWE's power dynamics that changes everything heading into Royal Rumble and beyond. But here's the question that should be burning in your mind right now. Why did this match happen now, and what prompted WWE to finally pull the trigger on a dream match they could have saved for WrestleMania? The setup was deceptively simple, which should have been the first warning sign that nothing about this encounter would follow normal patterns. Oba Femi, the dominant NXT champion who's been systematically destroying everyone put in front of him with a combination of raw power and surprising agility for someone his size, had been making noise about wanting to test himself against main roster competition. Not just any competition, the absolute best, the legends, the names that define what it means to be dominant in WWE. And Brock Lesnar, the beast incarnate who's spent 2 decades proving he's the most legitimate combat athlete in professional wrestling history, apparently heard those callouts and decided they required a response that couldn't be delivered through words. The announcement came without warning during Raw's opening segment. Paul Heyman, yes, that Paul Heyman, the same man currently dealing with the Vision falling apart and Roman Reigns' fury, appeared looking uncharacteristically disheveled and desperate. He grabbed a microphone and delivered what can only be described as a Hail Mary attempt to regain relevance and power. Ladies and gentlemen, my name is Paul Heyman, and tonight I am advocating for the return of the beast incarnate, Brock Lesnar, who will be facing NXT's so-called ruler, Oba Femi, in a match that will remind everyone why Brock Lesnar is still the most dangerous human being in sports entertainment. Wait. Did Paul Heyman just announce Brock Lesnar's return while simultaneously still representing what's left of the Vision? What game is Paul playing now, and how does bringing back Brock fit into his increasingly desperate attempts to maintain power and influence? The question hangs in the air like smoke from a gun that's just been fired, and the implications are staggering when you consider Paul's history of creating situations that benefit him regardless of who wins or loses. The crowd's reaction was nuclear, a mixture of shock, excitement, and genuine curiosity about what Brock Lesnar in 2025 would look like against someone like Oba Femi, who represents everything WWE has been building toward with their newer, younger, incredibly athletic big men. Brock defined the monster archetype for a generation, but Oba has been positioned as the evolution of that archetype, someone with Brock's power but enhanced agility. Someone who can move like a cruiserweight despite weighing well over 260 pounds. This wasn't just veteran versus rookie, this was past versus future, and everyone understood the stakes went beyond just winning a match. Oba Femi's entrance was a statement of confidence bordering on arrogance. The NXT champion walked to that ring like he owned not just his brand, but the entire company, the championship over his shoulder catching light in ways that made it impossible to ignore. His physique is genuinely remarkable even in an industry full of exceptional athletes, broad shoulders, tiny waist, muscles that look carved from granite by an obsessive sculptor. He entered the ring and stood in the center, arms spread wide, daring Brock Lesnar to actually show up and face him. The body language screamed, "I'm not afraid of your legend, old man, come get destroyed by the future." And then Brock's music hit. That familiar, ominous sound that's preceded countless destructions, countless conquests, countless moments where Brock Lesnar reminded everyone why he's been able to demand whatever he wants from WWE for 20 years. But something was different this time. Brock emerged without his usual bounce, without the almost playful aggression that's characterized his entrances. This Brock was laser-focused, moving with predatory intent, eyes locked on Oba Femi with an intensity that suggested genuine respect for the opponent mixed with absolute certainty about the outcome. This wasn't Brock coming out to have fun or collect a paycheck. This was Brock Lesnar making a point. Paul Heyman followed Brock to ringside, but noticeably kept his distance, not doing his usual elaborate introduction, not inserting himself into the moment the way he typically does. Why the reticence? Is Paul afraid that Brock knows about his manipulations with the Vision and Tyler Black? Is he worried that bringing Brock back might create more problems than solutions if the Beast decides Paul's schemes have gone too far? The Advocate looked less like an advocate and more like someone who'd released a weapon he wasn't entirely certain he could control. The bell rang, and for a long moment, Brock and Oba just stared at each other from across the ring. The crowd was absolutely electric, standing and screaming, flashbulbs going off everywhere as people tried to capture this moment. Two absolute physical specimens, two men who've built their entire identities around being the most dominant force in any room they enter, sizing each other up and calculating approach strategies. Who moves first in a confrontation between unstoppable forces? Who blinks when both men are accustomed to everyone else backing down? Oba moved first, stepping forward with hands raised, and Brock responded instantly with a lightning-fast takedown that sent the NXT champion crashing to the mat. The speed was shocking. Brock Lesnar is approaching 50 years old, has taken ungodly amounts of damage throughout his career, and still moves like an NCAA Division I heavyweight champion who could compete tomorrow. He immediately started throwing knees and forearms from top position, amateur wrestling credentials on full display, showing Oba that strength and size don't mean much when you're fighting someone who understands leverage and positioning at an elite level. But Oba Femi is an NXT champion because he crumbles under pressure. He powered out of Brock's control, literally bench pressing the Beast off him with an explosion of strength that sent Brock flying backward. The crowd gasped, "Did we just see someone overpower Brock Lesnar through pure strength?" Oba got to his feet and immediately went on offense, throwing hands with bad intentions, each punch landing with sickening thuds that echoed through the arena. A massive clothesline sent Brock into the corner, and Oba followed with a running splash that would have crushed a normal human being into paste. Here's the second critical question. Was Brock expecting Oba to be this strong, this aggressive, this legitimately dangerous? The expression on Brock's face suggested genuine surprise mixed with something that might have been respect or might have been the realization that this wasn't going to be the easy destruction he perhaps anticipated. Oba pulled Brock out of the corner and delivered a devastating power slam that shook the ring, the impact so heavy that announcers speculated whether the canvas could handle this level of punishment. The near fall that followed was shockingly close enough that even hardcore fans who knew Brock wasn't losing started questioning whether WWE might actually be ready to pass the torch to their next monster. Brock kicked out with authority and immediately rolled out of the ring to create distance and reassess. This is vintage Lesnar psychology. When things aren't going as planned, create separation, slow the pace, force the opponent to fight on your terms instead of theirs. But Oba Femi wasn't interested in giving Brock time to think. He launched himself over the top rope with a tope suicida that absolutely should not be physically possible for someone his size. 260 pounds of muscle flying through the air and crashing into Brock Lesnar on the outside, sending both men into the barricade with impact that made fans in the front row flinch backward. The brawl that erupted on the outside was absolute chaos, these two monsters throwing each other into ring steps, into announce tables, into anything that could be used as a weapon or impact point. The referee was counting, but both men clearly didn't care about countouts or disqualifications. This had transcended wrestling match and become something raw, a legitimate fight between two alpha predators establishing dominance. Brock delivered a thunderous German suplex on the outside that dumped Oba directly on his head and shoulders. Oba responded by catching Brock's attempted charge and delivering a spinebuster onto the steel ramp that created a sound like a car crash. They brawled back toward the ring with the referee's count reaching 15, 16, 17. Both men clearly aware but choosing violence over rule compliance. They rolled into the ring simultaneously at 19, beating the count by the narrowest possible margin, and immediately started throwing bombs again without any rest or recovery period. The pace was unsustainable, the kind of intensity that typically lasts 30 seconds before both competitors need to slow down and catch their breath. But neither Brock nor Oba was willing to show weakness by slowing down first, so the violence just continued escalating. Brock hit 3 consecutive German suplexes, each one dumping Oba with increasing impact, the crowd counting along with each devastating throw. But on the 4th attempt, Oba reversed with an elbow that caught Brock flush on the jaw, stunning the beast long enough for Oba to execute a German suplex of his own, throwing Brock Lesnar with the same move Brock had been using to destroy opponents for years. The symbolism was impossible to miss. The student using the teacher's signature against him, the future literally throwing the past around the ring, the next generation proving they could do everything the previous generation did but bigger and scarier. The third question cuts deep. At what point does Brock Lesnar's legendary toughness and experience overcome Oba Femi's youth and explosive power? Or are we actually witnessing the moment when it doesn't, when the established monster finally meets someone who can match him physically and is hungry enough to go further than Brock's willing to go at this stage of his career? The uncertainty makes every near fall feel legitimate, every big move feel like a potential finish, every moment pregnant with the possibility of genuine upset. Oba signaled for his finish, the devastating powerbomb that's ended countless NXT matches, lifting Brock with a strength that seemed impossible even knowing Oba's capabilities. But Brock, using 20 years of main event experience, shifted his weight mid-lift and countered into a DDT that spiked Oba's head into the canvas. Both men were down, chests heaving, sweat pouring, bodies showing the accumulation of damage from this absolute war. The referee started a 10 count, and for a moment it seemed possible both men might not beat it, might both be too exhausted and damaged to continue. Brock got to his feet at 7. Oba at 8. They met in the center of the ring and started throwing hands again, neither man with anything left for defense, just pure slugging it out with fists and forearms and elbows. Brock's lip was split and bleeding. Oba's eye was swelling shut. Both men were running on nothing but pride and the absolute refusal to be the one who quit first. This wasn't about winning anymore, it was about proving something fundamental about toughness and heart and what it means to be a monster in WWE. And then Paul Heyman made the critical mistake that changed everything. He climbed onto the ring apron, presumably to provide some kind of distraction or assistance to Brock, and Brock, who was in the process of setting up for the F5, turned and glared at Paul with such raw fury that Heyman literally fell off the apron backward. The message was clear. Brock didn't want Paul's help, didn't ask for interference, and was insulted by the implication that he needed assistance to defeat Oba Femi. But that split second of distraction, that momentary division of attention, was all the opening Oba needed. The ruler caught Brock from behind, hoisted him up, and delivered his finishing powerbomb with such force that the ring actually shifted on its moorings. The impact was catastrophic, the kind of move that should end matches immediately. Oba covered, hooking both legs, the referee sliding into position for the count. 1, 2. The arena was losing its collective mind. Brock kicked out. The disappointment from fans who wanted to see history made was palpable, but so was the awe at Brock Lesnar's legendary resilience. How many times has this man kicked out of moves that would end anyone else? How deep does his gas tank go when pushed by a legitimate threat? Oba looked shocked, genuinely uncertain what more he could possibly do to put away the beast incarnate. He pulled Brock up for another powerbomb, looking to remove all doubt, lifting the beast once again. And Brock countered mid-move directly into the F5. The reversal was so smooth, so technically perfect, that it barely looked like Brock had exerted any effort despite having just been hoisted for a powerbomb. Oba crashed to the mat, and Brock immediately covered, but now it was Oba's turn to demonstrate his own resilience by kicking out at 2.5. These two monsters had just hit their finishing moves on each other and both kicked out. What does it take to end a match when both competitors refuse to stay down? The fourth question demands consideration. How far are they willing to go, and what happens when WWE's two most unstoppable forces discover they might have finally found the one person who can actually stop them? The answer came in the form of both men getting to their feet simultaneously, looking at each other with expressions mixing exhaustion and respect, and the dawning realization that this might not end with a clean finish, that some fights are too even to have clear winners. They charged at each other simultaneously, both going for clotheslines, and the double collision sent both men crashing to the mat yet again. The referee checked on both competitors, both of whom were barely moving, both of whom had given everything they had and found it still wasn't enough to put away their opponent. The count started again, reaching 6, 7, 8, and people started seriously wondering if this would end in a double count-out or no contest. If we'd witnessed something so brutal and evenly matched that wrestling's traditional win-loss structure couldn't contain it. But that's when the chaos really erupted and transformed this from an incredible match into something that will have repercussions for weeks or months. Gunther's music hit, the ring general, former Intercontinental Champion, someone who's been suspiciously quiet during all the recent chaos with the Vision and the Shield and Tyler Black, suddenly making his presence known. He walked to ringside with his usual measured pace, face betraying no emotion, but his eyes locked on the two monsters who were slowly getting to their feet in the ring. Why Gunther? Why now? What possible interest does the ring general have in a match between Brock Lesnar and Oba Femi? The answer revealed itself when Gunther grabbed a microphone and delivered a statement that sent shockwaves through everyone watching. You call yourselves monsters. You call yourselves the most dominant forces in WWE. But dominance without discipline is just chaos. Power without purpose is just destruction. At Royal Rumble, I will show both of you what real dominance looks like when I eliminate you both from the Rumble match and prove that mat wrestling and technical superiority will always triumph over your barbaric displays of strength. The declaration was delivered with such absolute certainty that it felt less like a threat and more like a prophecy. But Gunther apparently wasn't content with just verbal challenges. He entered the ring where Brock and Oba were still recovering, and the tension was immediately palpable. Three of WWE's most physically imposing and legitimately dangerous performers in the same ring, all running on fumes from various exertions, all with egos that don't permit backing down from any challenge. This was powder keg with multiple lit fuses all burning toward the same explosive conclusion. Brock and Oba, despite having just been trying to destroy each other, seemed to reach an unspoken understanding that Gunther interrupting their moment required unified response. They both turned toward the ring general, and for a brief second, it looked like we were about to get an impromptu handicap match with two exhausted monsters taking on a fresh Gunther. But that's when the cavalry arrived. Ludwig Kaiser, Gunther's longtime associate, rushing to ringside along with several other performers who've aligned themselves with Gunther's vision of bringing technical wrestling back to prominence in WWE. The numbers suddenly shifted dramatically. The brawl that erupted was absolute pandemonium reminiscent of the SmackDown chaos just days earlier. Brock was throwing Germans on anyone who got close. Oba was power-bombing people who made the mistake of entering his range. Gunther was chopping both monsters with those devastating knife-edge chops that sound like gunshots. Bodies were flying everywhere. The ring couldn't contain the violence, so it spilled to the outside, up the ramp, into the crowd sections. Security rushed to intervene, but were immediately overwhelmed by the sheer scale and intensity of this multi-person brawl between some of WWE's most dangerous performers. And then, because apparently the universe decided that WWE Raw needed to completely lose its mind, Bobby Lashley's music hit. The Almighty, who's been on hiatus dealing with contract negotiations and personal business, returned at this exact chaotic moment and immediately started throwing people around like they weighed nothing. But was Bobby there to help someone, or was this just Bobby inserting himself into the chaos because he saw opportunity? The ambiguity made everything more uncertain and more exciting. The fifth critical question, Is WWE deliberately creating absolute chaos across all their programming to build toward Royal Rumble? Or has storyline management actually lost control and we're watching real backstage politics and genuine conflicts playing out under the thin veneer of entertainment? The line between work and shoot has become so blurred that even hardcore fans who pride themselves on being smart to the business can't definitively say what's real and what's performance anymore. Paul Heyman, who'd been watching from a safe distance, suddenly found himself face-to-face with Bobby Lashley, and the color drained from Paul's face. Bobby and Paul have history, complicated, contentious history involving broken promises and manipulated situations. Bobby grabbed Paul by his collar and lifted him effortlessly,